We are rural women. We are strong. We're ambitious. We're leaders. And we inspire. Some of us are mothers and caregivers, partners, workers and community members, friends. And we don't do it alone. We seek community, connection, and representation of people like us. 100 Rural Women plants that seed. We aim to cultivate a community that empowers rural women and lifts one another up. Welcome to our Spotlight series, where we interview amazing women who are making a difference for rural communities across Minnesota, because we believe that women like you deserve a spotlight. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me today again. And I'd just like to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and, what you do and how you're involved in rural.
My name is Inae Carlisle, and I currently serve as the Vice President of Programs at the McKnight Foundation based in Minneapolis. I have been connected to rural America for my whole life, basically. And in Minnesota, I've had the pleasure of meeting with you and others at 100 Rural Women, and also working with the Minnesota Initiative Foundations, which were started by the McKnight Foundation in the mid-'80s. And then also being part of strategy at the foundation, in particular the New Communities program that has moved statewide as of 2019. So just delighted to be here today, Alex.
Do you want to just kind of go into your connection to rural America a little bit and why you are so passionate about it?
Sure. So I was raised by a mother who grew up in a very small town in northern Indiana, and she was raised by parents who were also from that area. My grandfather in particular was a farm boy. He had one pair of shoes growing up, and he married my grandmother in the big town of 400 people when they were young. And so my mother was raised there, and then after she went to college, she immediately dropped out after meeting my father, who moved back to that town and became the K-12 art teacher for the school. And so while we ended up moving away because we just couldn't afford to live there anymore in my childhood, it continues to be a place where I have family today. And up until when my parents passed away, spent summers and all of the holidays there, and just have a real deep connection to the pace of life, I would say the hardworking nature that I grew up in, and the generosity that looks different in rural than it might in an urban setting, but that when anything happens, people come together and take care of each other. And so I have just a real strong sense of connection to growing up and being part of a family that really is rooted in rural Indiana, actually.
Yeah. I mean, it must have been quite an experience to be welcomed into these, this Pueblo community that is so different from, what you feel like you may have grown up with. How do you approach wanting to create help and access to resources without trying to change them?
So I feel like I had a real privilege both in the small liberal arts college I went to in Indiana and also in my graduate studies to get acquainted with thinkers like the late Bell Hooks, who just passed away at the end of last year, and Thich Nhat Hanh, Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian pedagogist, and many others that really helped me see that the power is actually in understanding that every place you go and with everyone you encounter, there's already strength and a lot of knowledge. And so what I was taught really was the discipline of listening first, and that it was my job as an outsider coming in to really respect and understand the resilience and the cultures that in many ways I talk about, like people are singing a song that you just can't hear, and they're dancing a dance, but you don't recognize it because you're coming from the outside in. And so what it takes is actually, for me, was sitting for hours in hogans with Navajo people listening or sitting outside of a government office on a pueblo north of Albuquerque and waiting for the elder to invite me in, and showing up. And so, in many ways, I think philanthropy, because we have resources and power, it really is important for us to honor and adapt and learn rather than come in with force, and understand what we offer and what we don't. And you really learn that in relationship. And people have really deep understandings of their community, and they have deep passions and pride and also deep pain. And I think that is the role that I think philanthropy at its best really is responsive to that and understands what they can bring, and how to partner well.
Really cool. Yeah. I think that, I mean, that's work that I'm not familiar with at all, but I really appreciate learning about. And there's just so many more communities than we even think there are. And it's really cool to know that people outside of them are interested in learning and listening. That's the big thing. And so in all of your, I mean, not just professional, but personal experiences as well, I mean, there had to have been moments that felt discouraging. Can you tell me about one that you did feel discouraged and how you overcame that?
There's so many different ones where I think the theme is that you feel uncomfortable like an outsider, that
Right.
for whatever reason you go into a place and you don't know the local customs, you don't know the language, you don't know the dialect or their accent. Sometimes they're different languages, and you observe things that are different, but you just feel lost. And so, one of the early times, I was probably about your age, Alexa Joe. I had just moved to Southern California for my master's degree, and I was living in dorms, and this was before GPS. This was before cell phones. Like, didn't know anybody, had no friends, no family, and I would just perpetually get lost in these neighborhoods across Los Angeles. And if you've ever been there, it's sprawling. And I remember many times, actually a couple times, I actually drove to the airport and it was like, I'm just going to get on a plane and leave everything because I'm so like stressed out and I feel like I don't belong. And then I would go back and say, okay, you've got to stretch yourself. And ultimately what I did was I started to really reframe the experience to say, what can I learn from this? And how can I accept this is what it's going to take to adapt? And so I did a lot of things when I would get lost, which was perpetually. I would decide to try to look around and understand the kinds of communities that I was driving through and tried to really get to know landmarks and understand how to navigate so that to make it my own in a way. But it was tough, and I think those skills of just being able to observe and accept that you're just not going to know things, and to accept that you're going to feel a lot of different ways, really, really something that I still do. If I go into a place where I feel uncertain about the customs or the language and I don't know people, just try to observe and take in the experience and accept it for what it is, an opportunity to be uncomfortable and to learn something and not to feel insecure about it.
And so with that, if you could give one piece of advice to your former self, what would that be, do you think?
I would say not to feel as though I had to shoulder everything.
Mm,
I think that women oftentimes are put in a position, and we put ourselves in that position. And culturally, there are habits that we have that women tend to take on the psychic stress and burden of their families, their siblings, their extended families, oftentimes, and the matriarchs, right, inheriting the mantle of the matriarch. And I think that there's something beautiful and powerful about that. And there's also something that can be isolating and overwhelming about that. And so I would tell my younger self that that it's okay to say no, and that I don't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I can share that, and I can have a little bit more fun.
yeah. Oh, I feel you there, Kara. I get that. That was a lesson I was working on learning the past few years, especially in when I was in school. You don't have to take on the weight of everything and everyone around you. But again, because that is kind of that, matriarchal idea, that's something that I think is pretty common for women to do. And I appreciate that advice. I like that a lot. And then just to close out, is there a quote or phrase or principle that you live by that you really like?
I'm a big admirer of a lot of folks, but I would say the one that has stuck with me still today, I heard again when I was in my early 20s doing work in Los Angeles, and a leader at the time who I met when I was living in a hippie eco village and riding my bike around town. That's another story, Alexa Joe. Talk a lot about this concept of reciprocal accountability. And to break it down, it's that I'm responsible to you and you're responsible to me. We're accountable to one another, so that oftentimes we've been taught formally or informally that responsibility goes only one way. So like the parent is responsible to the child, or that these roles that we play, the elected officials accountable to the electorate. That's true, but it misses half of the equation, that I'm responsible to my daughter and she's responsible and accountable to me, that we are in relationship. And so that means that we're in a mutual relationship. And so as we think about the conversation earlier around power, or even around ourselves with our friends or our colleagues or our communities, if I see that you're stressed out and taking on too much and I care about you, I'm responsible to that relationship and we're accountable to one another. It doesn't matter what our role is or our title. And I can be a really bad friend, or I can be a really bad colleague, or I can be a really bad electorate where I put elected officials in impossible situations without doing my work to understand the constraints of their particular position. And so I think that for me, I try oftentimes to think about putting myself in someone else's shoes, is the old adage, right? But in a deeper way, that I believe that I'm accountable to every relationship, and that is power with, not power under, not power over, but power with. And we have different roles and different powers, but we shouldn't differentiate the accountability we have to one another.
I do want to hear more about this hippie eco village that you were living in and how you got there, because that sounds really amazing.
After graduate school, I didn't know what I was going to do, because I had done 7 years of higher education in college and graduate school in religion and politics. And I was actually on the track to become an ordained minister. Okay. And during my master's degree, I realized I started having all these nightmares, Alexa Joe, like stress, like I felt really confined. Because I think my life experience and all the different people I've met and what I'd learned is that I felt like the world was much bigger than one particular way of thinking about religion or meaning. For me, it was a very big deal, because I'd been raised in a really strong Protestant Christian family. And so I had no clue what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't go that path to ordination. So I was on a trip and I met this group of kind of hippies, who had bought a building outside of the traditional system, like loans from a revolving loan fund of supporters, and they decided to rehabilitate buildings that had been impacted after the Rodney King verdict came out in 1992, which was one of the big flashpoints in the country around race, not dissimilar from what happened after the murder of George Floyd here a year and a half ago. So this group of folks who had planned to buy property and do a hippie village out in a rural area decided they were going to stay in the city. So they're one of the only urban eco villages in the world. Okay. And so I went and I met them, and it was low income housing, and they would give you even cheaper rent if you got rid of any cars and just used low carbon footprint, rode your bike. And they had to vote you in. So you had to meet them, and then you had to get voted in. And I will say I was voted in the first night, which is not supposed to happen. You're supposed to like have a community vote and everything. And I ended up living there, and we all did small businesses. There was a
Okay.
bicycle repair shop, and we did education for young people, and I learned about composting, and we had guests come from all over the world, and it was affordable housing, and I could walk or ride my bike to work. So we had chickens and everything else. So it's still there if you ever want to go.
Cool. Is it, and did you say this was in California?
Yeah, it's called the Los Angeles Eco Village, and you
Okay.
can look it up, LA Eco Village. And they owned maybe they own three buildings now, but when I was there, they moved it into a land trust, I think, so that you could buy your own, you sort of gain equity in your own unit, but they were all like efficiency units with little kitchenettes and a little bathroom and basically one room. And everything was rehabbed by hand, so lead abatement and everything, because we really didn't, at the time, there was a commitment to use alternative forms of capital.
Right.
So yeah, lots of stories there. So
Thank you so much.
yeah, well, thank you for reaching out, and I hope this got you what you needed. And
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for meeting with me today and for being a part of the 100 Rural Women Spotlight profile series. And we're excited to have this up on our website.